That's not the
History,
real
you
whistle.
say? Absolutely. Las Vegas's history didn't just begin when we became a city in 1905. You'll have to go back much further, 10,000 years in fact, to discover our roots. But we're going to make those discoveries easier today. That's because right this second, you're riding through where it all began. Here, just minutes away from the concrete and bright lights of one of the world's most well-known cities, lies a spectacular cultural and historical treasure, the Las Vegas Springs Preserve. Did you see the water well derrick out your window as our train departed the station? It's symbolic of the reason this land has a rich history. Water.
Water.
Which means
Water is
water,
the lifeblood of the desert, and abundant water once flowed here. For more than 10,000 years, water from right here at the Springs Preserve, including the historic Las Vegas Springs and Las Vegas Creek, sustained meadows, mesquite thickets, cottonwoods, and willows that harbored a diverse array of wildlife. This same water helped our city become what it is today. Can you still spot some of the tall cottonwoods? Look for our village's trains as we travel along. Many of these cottonwoods were first introduced here around the 1850s, and some are 100 years old. Imagine this place as an eagle island, a patch of green among the browns and reds of the desert. Waters deep below the ground sustain the cottonwoods and life along the creek, healing and nourishing the people and animals who stopped at its banks. Those spring waters stopped flowing to the surface in the 1960s, touching much of the landscape. But today, you'll see that landscape changing for the better.
You're traveling in comfort through about 110 acres of the preserve's 180-acre site. Things are a bit wilder here, and the sidewalks and walls outside our borders, and that natural look is just the way we like it. You see, we're restoring this land to how it appeared before our valley was so developed. Wildlife thrives in this environment. In fact, more than 250 species of animals call the preserve home. Reptiles and mammals live here year-round, and each year, some 150 species of migratory birds pass through. During our tour, you may spot a lizard, a ground squirrel, or even a member of our resident fox family. Keep in mind that many desert animals fly low or even underground during daytime hours and warmer months. Today, we're traveling on our Exploration Route Trail, the longest of our 4 trails. Do you hear a faint hum of traffic nearby? That's because a portion of this trail borders what is now Highway 95, or US 95 to the locals. While 95 is our neighbor, it isn't a nuisance, since a protective, eco-friendly sound wall shelters the preserve's natural areas and habitats. In the 1970s, these areas were almost lost to development. Planners wanted to widen the old highway right through this property, and that led to plenty of debate about the future of these 180 acres. Citizens in the Las Vegas Valley Water District rallied to save the site, rightly calling it the birthplace of Las Vegas. In 1978, the Springs Preserve was named to the National Register of Historic Places. Nearly 30 years later, in 2007, we opened the Springs Preserve to the community and developed it into what you see today.
These 30 years are but a blip in the preserve story, which actually begins in prehistoric times, when the Las Vegas Valley was in the middle of a vast sea. Beginning around 200 million years ago, the seas began to recede and the desert began to form. Over thousands of years, water pushed up from under the ground. As springs bubbled up from the aquifer beneath, the water soaked the soil.
picture gallery shards from early home. We found evidence that these earliest inhabitants, as well as Native Americans who followed, built big houses right here at the Springs Reserve. In fact, excavations have revealed behind an ancestral Carolina house dating back from 670 to 870 AD. You can see the excavations by walking on the Springs Trail. It's not easy to study the northern desert, as this westward surge and as these. In fact, John C. Howell made one of his 1870s dugout house on this principle. The ancestral Puebloans built their houses partially underground to provide shelter from the desert's harsh winds and cooling relief from the blistering summer sun. Today, you can see a recreation of the house inside the Origin Museum.
Well, time marched on, even thousands of years ago. Ancestral Puebloans gave way to other Native American groups. The Batayans lived in the valley seasonally until the 1700s, followed by the Southern Piutes. The Southern Piutes were the primary Native American group in the area when the first Europeans began exploring here, and are still the valley's largest Native American group today. Living on the land was important in centuries past, and the Southern Piutes were skilled at it. They used many of the desert's natural resources for food and medicines. For example, have you ever noticed the seed pods that grow on local mesquite trees? The Southern Piutes collected thousands of pounds of these pods each year. They ground the pods into flour, which they stored to make a variety of foods year-round. Water from the springs helped them grow and harvest maize and squash near here too. Their diet also included rabbits, which they hunted year-round, and other larger animals seasonally. Beginning in the 1830s, European explorers began to discover this land already known to Native Americans. The first to make his mark was likely Rafael Rivera, a young scout who was part of an expedition to find